Alright everyone, we start off today with preliminary midterm predictions. We're less than 2 months away. Of course, we're now halfway through September, then you've got October and part of November, and then the big day happens. Reminder, I will of course be going live during the midterms, whether I'm here or in the United States. Time zones be damned. I can always pound more caffeine down and I'll be fine. With co-host Sleazy P. Martini himself, we also have some confirmed guests aboard. I'll keep that docket secret for now, because first I have to figure out on StreamYard how to actually have more than one other person on the stream. But here are some preliminary midterm predictions. These are subject to change. We've already seen several major swings within polling in the lead up to midterms over the last year. Mainly it's been against the Democrats. Right now, the generic ballot, of course, is basically a 50-50 sum game, if you look at the aggregate. The problem is that we have to determine, is there wiggle room in there? Is there an oversampling of Democrats, maybe of Republicans, etc.? Oftentimes, when people talk about this, they only look at the broader picture of national polling, and they don't really look at the state-level polling. And I think that's why I've been more accurate than most people analyzing polls, because I'm willing to dig into the nitty-gritty of those races. The first prediction is the Republicans take the House, and I don't think it'll even be close. Even if there were no oversampling of Democrats, and therefore the Democrats broke even or a little bit more in the toss-up races that are there, it doesn't matter. You've got enough races that at least lean red, so that if the Republicans generally held all of those, they would still take the House of Representatives. And of course, I use RCP, and aggregates are better than single polls. All of the fucking goddamn time, I have to deal with people telling me that I'm wrong because one poll disagrees with the aggregate number. And I always look at RCP and then I find that it's an outlier of 5 to 10 points. and I get sick of it. I get the Karl Rove treatment from conservatives, and I get the wishful thinking sort of craptivist shit from leftoids constantly telling me that I'm wrong, and I'm looking back at my predictions over the last, 4 or 5 elections. I think I'm going with my gut instinct and with an aggregated polling result, generally speaking. Now, you could have a huge swing. To be clear, you've had polling situations before in recent history where you end up with a 7-point differential between the polled number and the final result. Even in the 2020 election, of course, Trump coming in well behind massively outperformed the actual polling aggregate. This is due to differentials in turnout, differentials in enthusiasm, especially leading to that. So the first prediction is the Republicans take the House. As I've explained, even if they take less than half of the toss-up seats, so those that are razor thin, you don't have good polling, you have very little polling, you have decent amounts of polling and they all show a tie, even if they only take a quarter of those races, and I would favor them to take more than half, they sweep the House. We're talking a 20-seat majority, possibly more. Right now, 25, I think, is where I would put the even point as far as a majority. So that's a gain of more than 30 seats. This would be historically normal. You have a sitting president who's not very popular. His approval is still in the shitter, although it did recover there. And that's basically because Dem partisans that down ballot were going to vote Democrat all the way anyway, climbed back aboard the Biden approval bus because he actually accomplished something by their partisan standards. I don't think that this actually affects the metric of any other down ballot races, because those people were already going to vote Democrat if they vote. I guess they might get a turnout boost from it, and so that might swing a few seats here and there that are competitive. That's basically it. If we look at some individual races, and I talked about some of them yesterday, I would favor Kari Lake to win over Katie Hobbs in the gubernatorial race in Arizona. Yes, I realize there may be some honking in Maricopa, but in a 50-50 way race, I think she still wins. One of the big problems is that Katie Hobbs is still refusing to debate, and people are beginning to notice this and get a little bit frustrated with it. To his credit, Fetterman decided he would have a debate with Mehmet Oz. He didn't go with the, well, I'm not going to appear on stage. He had a fucking stroke and he's still willing to debate. What's Katie Hobbs' fucking excuse? Her excuse is basically, I don't want to justify Kari Lake and this MAGA bullshit. It'll make Arizona into a laughingstock, so I refuse. it makes you look pathetic. It makes you look like you're afraid to debate and you're making excuses. As I pointed out the other day, even if she does debate, Kari Lake will curb stomp her, and that might arguably be worse. I guess she's ignoring her own staff's advice at this point. Maybe she's making the right decision, but I think Kari Lake will probably get it. We might see Masters win. That's a 50-50 sum game at this point. Another race to watch, ironically, is the New York gubernatorial election, Hochul versus Zeldin. I predict Hochul will win. This is New York. It's a far blue state. If Zeldin gets even close, it'll be remarkable. What we need to watch is the turnout differential and the final result. I don't expect Zeldin to win. I realize Trump is stumping for him. I realize that Hochul is a mess, and she's coming in below par by Democratic Party standards for a race that's happening in New York State, just to be clear. How much will she come in under par? This will need to be autopsied after the midterms. If Zeldin gets within a single-digit gap of Hochul, it'll be a qualified victory for the Republicans just by getting reasonably close. Here's the big one. Here's the real upshot. We'll compare the differential in that race, in which I expect Hochul, she's got a 95% chance of victory. To be clear, Hochul will probably win. If that gap is smaller than the gap by which Abbott or DeSantis or some of these other Republicans win, alarm bells will secretly be going off at the DNC in the lead up to the 2024 election. I also speculate, here's another prediction, it won't be long after the midterms before Trump announces whether he's running for the presidency or not. I suspect that he will run, and then all political chaos will break loose, and it'll be very funny, and it'll make my job easier because there will be so many Trump derangement syndrome articles. Donald, please do run. There'll be a never-ending, inexhaustible fodder for videos. It'll be great. For 2 fucking years, I barely have to do any work. It'll turn back into the Trump channel, I suppose, because, people won't be talking about anything else across the whole fucking internet. Oh, there was a 9.0 earthquake that destroyed several nuclear reactors in the Philippines? Who gives a shit about that? Donald Trump, orange man bad. I kid and I digress. Second prediction. I think that the Republicans have still a 50-50 shot of retaking the Senate. All of the doom and gloom speculation with regards to the generic ballot, etc., do not necessarily trickle down to state-level races. When we realize this, we can have a Democratic Party that partially recovers, but it's recovering support mainly among partisans that would already lean towards voting for them in the first place. And we've still got enough time so that if the trajectory that I'm seeing begin to build remains true, the Republicans may still be up in the generic ballot anyway. Historically, over the last few elections, we would add a couple of points to their result because of turnout differentials. If they merely retake the House, of course, that's a huge win. But it's not in and of itself a red wave. You also have to chip away maybe a gubernatorial slot, gain an advantage in the Senate. That would be a red wave election. Right now, I would say, while it's 50-50, I would give it a slightly higher chance the GOP takes at least one additional Senate seat, and that's based on one very important Senate race, Warnock versus Walker in Georgia. Warnock is the incumbent. He's one of the seats currently held by Democrats. We have 3 polls in a row now that show Herschel Walker very slightly ahead of him, by about a point now at this point. If he manages to knock out Warnock, and that's a net pickup for the GOP that a month ago they weren't expected to get, that entirely shifts the dynamic. When Democrats claim that they're going to gain, I've seen them claim they're going to get 4 or 5 additional Senate seats. Based on the polling there alone, I don't think that's feasible. It's possible the Democrats take a seat or two. They could physically take the Senate. I just think they'll come in far below their expectations. I think the GOP, like with who was Newt Gingrich several months ago, he had an article where he predicted 6 GOP pickups in the Senate. That is also probably not going to happen. To be clear, I think it'll be very close to a 50-50 sum game. Now, would I be happy if the GOP took a couple of seats? Yeah. At this point, the Democrats desperately need to be punished so that they don't have a mandate, so that they can hopefully collapse as a party and then be reborn as something respectable other than the monstrosity that it's become. I would like to have a second political party in the United States that stands for something that I could feasibly vote for. Right now, there isn't. The Libertarians do, now that the Mises Caucus took over, but that's a third party sort of situation. It'd be nice if the Democrats would abandon like the leftoidism. We'll see what happens. I think they have to get curb stomped. I give better odds that there's a red wave than that there's a red trickle, and virtually no odds that there's a blue wave election. Even with honkening involved, it's not going to trickle down to enough House races, I think, to save the Democrats from losing control of that chamber of Congress. So those are some of the races to watch. Kerry Lake versus Hobbs is a big one. Another couple are the gubernatorial races, of course, in Texas and Florida. In Texas, Greg Abbott versus Beto O'Rourke. Beto will lose, but again, we have to see the differential. Will there be a surge for Beto, in which case Abbott holds on to his gubernatorial slot by a couple points? Will it be underwhelming? I think the latter. I don't think that Beto really inspires people. I think that, in fact, the opposite. He's so fucking boring when he gets up on stage and does his midlife crisis actor cringing. I think that it turns some people off, especially independent voters. With DeSantis versus Crist in Florida, correctly predicting, of course, that Crist would absolutely curb stomp Nikki Fried. She pretended up until the last minute that she was still viable, and it was always very, very funny to see the cope from the far left. Crist also doesn't energize the Democratic base. He's an old conservative dude. He initially was a conservative. This is not the kind of candidate that you want in the Democratic Party if you want young voters to go knock on doors, so to speak. I think that he will lose by 5 or more points to DeSantis. It won't be anywhere near as close as the last race. By the way, and I'm not sure of this, has Trump endorsed Ron DeSantis for governor, or is he basically just standing aside at the moment? Can't recall, actually, come to think of it. I think, though, that Abbott and DeSantis both win easily. We've got another big one, which is Rubio versus Demings. It'll be close. Rubio will hang on by the skin of his teeth, but I think that at the end of the day, he'll be reelected. That would be a big pickup for the Democrats. Be interesting. Rubio loses by half a point, and so does Warnock, and so they cancel each other out, reshuffling a chunk of the Senate. That would be interesting, but I don't think that it's likely. I think that Walker has a little bit more than a 50-50 shot in Georgia, and I think that Rubio has maybe a 60-40 chance of keeping his job against Val Demings. It's underwhelming, certainly, when you're the incumbent in a state that's now leaning more red. It shows that Rubio, the neocon sort of missing link candidate, is not so strong as people conceived of him as being. Remember, he was briefly floated as a potential president of the United States. I think he's ended that particular ambition. Another one, last one that we'll talk about, Abrams versus Kemp, Georgia gubernatorial slot. Kemp will win. There's no poll showing Stacey Abrams up. If anything, Kemp has grown his lead. In the aggregate, it's close to 5 points. It's a pretty comfortable lead. We'll have to watch the meltdown from the Stacey Abrams far leftoids after the midterm elections as well. Because before, when she lost, you'll remember, this was the last time around, she effectively refused to concede that she had lost. She's an election denier. It'll be funny if she does that when she loses by several more points than last time. It was a squeaker the last time around, and she harumphed and raged around, and so did her fans, claiming that voter suppression had caused it. If Kemp wins by 4 or 5 points, that's a lot more voters than the last time. Claiming voter suppression ain't going to go over too well. It'll be funny to either see her bow her head solemnly and have to do the take the step back from stage sort of thing the GOP typically does, or she'll have to get really fiery and spicy and go whole hog. And pardon the pun. We'll see which one happens. It'll be funny. Regardless of what happens, though, in the midterms, there will be meltdowns on election night. And I can't wait to cover them live. So stay tuned. That's less than 60 days from now. We're getting close. Basically, today is Halloween because, it's September. It's all the same to me. Trees are starting to lose some leaves and some color and stuff. Basically Halloween, and then it's basically midterms. And the day after that, it's basically Thanksgiving. And then it's basically Christmas. And then I get to turn 35 in January. So, yay, congrats to me. That's about all. Peace out.